When I look at Daniel Craig's run as James Bond and the public's response to each of his movies, it seems like Quantum of Solace always gets the short shift. Quantum of Solace is the 2008 direct sequel to Casino Royale, which was a movie that was not only very successful commercially, but also one that rebooted the franchise for modern audiences. So, being the direct sequel to that masterpiece of a movie, it's understandable that when many of us Bond nerds went to see Quantum in the fall of 2008, we walked away at least a little disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I didn't dislike Quantum, but I left the theater feeling like the film was overusing shaky, handheld camera work and rapid editing during the action scenes. It was a growing trend in action movies, and I just unfairly assumed that Quantum was doing the classic James Bond franchise move and ripping off whatever trend was popular when the movie was made. But over the years, I've been compelled to revisit Quantum of Solace many times, and my appreciation of it grows with each and every viewing. Some of those shaky, handheld action scenes that I initially was not a fan of now rank among my favorite action set pieces from the whole 007 franchise. So in today's video, I'm going to explain why I feel this way, and how the pacing and action inform us of the psychology of James Bond. The James Bond franchise has a lot of expectations surrounding it, and many of them revolve around who James is as a character. He's been around for so long and in multiple kinds of media that you can put him in an endless number of situations, and people would have an expectation for how he'd act or react. There's a rigidity to the character of 007 that's been consistent across all mediums since Bond's inception in Ian Fleming's novels. James Bond is almost never going to verbally express his feelings or be vulnerable with other people. He needs to keep a wall up around himself so he can be the best at what he does. Most 007 movies choose to ignore the psychology of James Bond and focus on the entertainment and spectacle qualities of the franchise. The closest most 007 movies get to digging into the inner psychology of James Bond is when they put an actual love interest opposite him, instead of the obligatory shallow woman that tradition says he has to sleep with. But Quantum of Solace does want to get into good old JB's head, just like Casino Royale before it and Skyfall after it. So how do you express the inner turmoil of Bond in a movie that also wants to be a stripped-down sequel that's 30 minutes shorter than Casino Royale? Well, the answer that Quantum of Solace lands on is to show you Bond's internal struggles through action. So let's take a look at a couple action scenes, starting with my favorite, the opening car chase. This chase is literally the first 3.5 minutes of the movie, so we don't have any context for why anything in the movie is happening yet. What are we supposed to take away from this thing? What is the scene telling us? Well, to me, it does two things. First, it tells us how to watch the movie. What do I mean? Well, Quantum of Solace as a whole has an average shot length of about 2 seconds, compared to this beginning chase sequence that has an average shot length of 1 second. I've heard some people argue that the shots are too short, that they fly by so quick it can be incomprehensible. But I would argue that this car chase is entirely legible and in fact pretty straightforward. Take a look at this short clip from the scene. The rhythm and pace of these shots introduces a sense of speed and danger to the chase, which will carry on throughout the sequence. There's no wasted shots in here. Each one is used to create a visceral feeling that allows the viewer to be swept along, or it delivers information. Sometimes doing both at once. Let's break that down a little bit slower. We can see that many of the shots here are repeating info, but because they're flying by at such a fast pace, the filmmakers have to make sure we understand what's happening in any given moment. Hence the repetition. There may be lots of cuts, but each one is carefully considered, allowing just enough time for you to absorb the frame and extract what's needed to understand the story. So, when you're watching the movie for the first time, you immediately have a good idea of the style and pacing that the film is going for. This is what I mean when I say the movie's teaching us how to watch it. That 1 second average shot length helps us become acclimated to the intense pace of Quantum as a whole. But I said the scene does two things. So what's the other? Well, it also tells us about Bond's mentality at the start of the movie. Look at the truck incident. In the first 30 seconds of the chase, the filmmakers are able to create a conflict that James has to solve. His solution, while quick and efficient, is also a little reckless, and has lasting consequences that nearly kill him later on in the sequence. And this is where James is mentally at the start of Quantum, single-minded in the pursuit of his goals. He doesn't care about the ramifications of his actions, as long as he can get revenge for the killing of his one true love. Still, this is all from the very first scene, so I'm going to jump around in the movie to expand on this further. As introduced in the opening, there's a motif of Bond making choices without understanding or acknowledging or even caring about the potential consequences, and this carries on throughout Quantum. We see this constantly reflected back at James throughout the first hour of the movie. His chase with a fellow MI6 agent turned evil results in the death of both an innocent bystander and the agent himself. Next up, Bond breaks into the hotel room of the first Quantum member that MI6 can find, and ends up fighting him to the death immediately. After that, 007 goes off and assumes that Camille is a damsel in distress, so he quote-unquote saves her, but in doing so also ruins her best shot at revenge against the man who killed her family and left her to die in a burning building. Later on, James has a very public fight with Dominic Green's henchmen, which results in a couple more people dead. And then he recruits 2 reluctant allies who also end up dying because of him. It's only because one of these allies is a friend that James starts to finally realize how he has lost his humanity. 007 has been behaving exactly as the kind of person we think he is, a cold, heartless killing machine. His desire for revenge has consumed him, and if he doesn't change now, he might never be able to. Okay, so with that context out of the way, we come to the final action set piece of the movie, the exploding hotel sequence. By this point, Bond and Camille have bonded over their shared trauma and lust for revenge. But James has also seen the harm it's bringing to himself and those around him. We can infer that he's questioning whether or not it's all worth it by this point, but his partner in crime here isn't quite on the same page yet. So they start an attack on the hotel where the villain is. Things immediately explode, you know the drill. The climax is when 007 and Camille are fighting their respective antagonists, and the movie is cutting back and forth between them. Camille delivers her final blow to the general off-screen, while James has Green by the hair and has essentially won his fight. But instead of staying to make sure his mark is safe and captured, 007 chooses to let him go so he can make sure his friend is alright. He chooses compassion over logic, he puts others before himself, and thus regains his humanity. He goes to Camille and comforts her while she's freaking out over what's happening. And through quick thinking, they're able to escape together in one piece. But that's why I love this movie. James Bond has an actual character arc. He grows, he changes during the course of the film. That's rare for a 007 movie. Sadly, when I go to break the movie down like this, some of its flaws do become more apparent. In my opinion, it has a few story beats that have some problems. Take the very end of the movie, for example. Yes, we needed closure on Bond's own revenge plot, but because of the final action scene and the choice 007 makes there, it ends up feeling kind of redundant and takes the tension out of the scene. Otherwise, Camille is a good foil to Bond, but her arc needed a little bit more screen time so her trauma could really land emotionally at the end. Dominic Green is kind of a forgettable villain as well. I like the actor's performance, but you never get to dig into what makes him tick, so he ends up seeming kind of generic. Strawberry Fields is, well, there's a bunch of problems there that I don't want to get into, so let's just say she's shoehorned into the movie. At least the fast pace and quick cut editing are a unique choice for a James Bond movie, but they also end up harming Quantum as well. It seems to me that the character issues I just talked about could have been solved or at least been done slightly better if those characters had more real estate to work with in the movie. It can be tough upon first viewing to digest it all, at least I felt that way. So much happened it just sort of washed over me when I first saw it. I definitely didn't engage with the themes of the movie until at least the second viewing, and I would bet most viewers didn't either. Without those ideas, I think it's easy to see why Quantum of Solace is sometimes seen as a kind of generic, soulless entry in the 007 franchise. But I think those ideas are all there. Maybe not as thoroughly explored as we may want them to be, but at least the movie is trying to engage with the psychology of James Bond, just like Daniel Craig's other 2 best outings as 007. And that's one of my biggest complaints with Spectre. Besides the end of the movie, we never really get into what James is thinking or feeling. I'm going in completely blind to see No Time to Die, so while I don't quite know what to expect, I'm choosing to remain optimistic. You can say what you want about Quantum of Solace, at least it had ambitions. They wanted the movie to be different. Even though it may not have always succeeded, I love it for trying.